First things first, spoiler warnings for the show Arcane. In early December, I released a video essay about Arcane and how it succeeded as an adaptation. One of the ideas I talked about in that video that I didn't flesh out properly was, what if we look at Silco as the protagonist or hero of the story? With that lens, what would change? Before we talk about that, it's important to understand the concept of cinematic tools used to subconsciously influence our perspective of the story. Essentially, things we don't notice influence the way we think about characters and the plot. An example of this is in 2019, I was hired to score an indie feature-length film, and while it was released to bad reviews, I learned a lot in the process of making music for a film. One of the first things I did was Google how much of a movie has music in it, and while I found a range of different answers, most said 40 to 60%. Knowing I couldn't just trust a stranger on the internet, I decided to open the movie Seven and watch it for the first time, taking notes whenever there was music. There was 1 hour and 6 minutes of music in the 2 hour and 7 minute film. The reason I bring this up is because even though I went into that film with the intention of noticing the music, I would be minutes into a scene before realizing that there had been music playing and I'd have to go back and find where it started. Unless you're deliberately paying attention, a lot of filmmaking tools can go unnoticed. But things like the way a shot is composed, the lighting, or the music can majorly influence the way we feel while watching a scene. Often when heroes and villains come on screen, there's a lot of obvious indicators about whether or not they're good or bad. If I were to ask you now what tools filmmakers use to help us know who the good guys and bad guys are, the things I just mentioned, like music, might come to mind first. But what if all the good guys are facing one way and all the bad guys are facing another? What are the characters wearing, and does the color involved influence our perspective? There's a lot of subtle tools used by filmmakers to help us decode the story so that it makes sense. Unless it's very purposeful, the last thing you want from your audience is confusion. You don't want people feeling lost about what's going on or who is who. So did the creators of Arcane use this to help us understand that Silco's the bad guy? If we were to compare the opening shot of Vi and Powder on top of the rooftops in Piltover versus our first introduction to Silco, is there a noticeable difference to how the characters are portrayed? The tools used when a character is shown influences our opinion of them, but it doesn't stop there. In any story, the writers get to choose what to show and what not to. It's common for us to see the context and the internal conflict that lead to a protagonist's decision, whereas with antagonists and villains, we often see the consequences and the actions themselves, often portrayed in an absolute way. I'm not saying this to criticize the way films are made. Context clues are incredibly important for creating a cohesive story. But with characters like Silco, if we were shown him in a completely different light, and got a chance to see the internal conflict and the context behind his decisions, maybe he wouldn't be such a villain. This lens changes a lot. For example, when I watched the end of episode 3, when Silco offered to help Jinx, I interpreted it as this manipulative, controlling thing in my first viewing. But what if Silco saw himself in the young child that was broken and betrayed by someone close to her? What if in a world of disparity and death, it was a moment of kindness? We never had the chance to see why Vander tried to kill Silco. And what both Vander and Silco were fighting for was noble. They were trying to break away from a broken system. When Sevika chooses not to betray Silco because of her loyalty, that's a moment of triumph. Despite what people say, she believed in what he was doing. And you may point out the actions that Silco took that were villainous, when he threatened Deckard or killed the cat, but my response to that was when Jinx was killing people in every episode after 3, when she shot people from the Undercity or exploded and killed enforcers, did you think of her as an antagonist? I didn't. We look at things like her tragic background, her mental illness, the instability of her lifestyle, the context behind her actions that make us think of her as a hero, someone redeemable. And I think that's the main thing that separates Silco from the rest of the characters in our story. Until a scene sitting at Vander's statue, or when he talks to Jinx as he's bleeding out, we never got a chance to see what was going on inside his brain, what made him human, what made him a hero. If you liked this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. If you didn't, leave a comment, let me know why. I'm going to be releasing more videos like this in the future, so please consider subscribing. Thanks.